Mandela effect believers are beside themselves because they can't reconcile the common, original Ford logo, which of course now looks like this. Many of them insist that the logo looked different, specifically without the so-called pigtail loop on the letter F. Obviously, there have been different revisions of the logo, and in fact their logo has had many facelifts. Here are the most notable ones from Logopedia. And there are those that are not so common as this plain Jane logo from 1928. And this one from 1938 resembles the now commonly seen logo, but with a heavier eyebrow-like broad stroke for the top arm of the F, as well as a bolder font overall. These two are from 1995. And this logo was registered in 1997. This one from 1917 very much resembles the common original logo. But when it comes to the Mandela effect folk, they refer to a logo that sort of looks like the official logo, but mainly without the loop in the F's arm. Well, there are reasonable explanations, some constant circumstances, as well as our common factors, such as suggestibility and bandwagon effect. So, why would this demonstrate a reality shift? Again, I ask, why the leap of logic? There was once a time where we'd acknowledge a variation, maybe as a rarity, maybe a knockoff, but we'd recognize it as such, a change, fakery, an update, or reversion. Now, instead, the sentiment is that reality has shifted and things are inherently changing. On top of that, there is a genuine resistance to even consider the logical possibilities that have otherwise, for most of their lives, ironically, dictate their reasoning. For example, Mandela followers disregarded the explanation highlighting logo change as a common occurrence in business. This is because the true changes shown in public record, according to them, occurred essentially before all of our time, and so nobody remembering the logo differently must be recalling a logo within our lifetime. But it is precisely this argument that is shaky at best. I am not certain as to why there is such a lack of critical thinking, and more importantly, a lack of lateral thinking to prove what is true through a reasonable explanation. Every time I think over any of these examples, Mandela effect rationalization really boggles the mind. This argument is flimsy because one assumes a company introduces a logo change and all products with previous logos subsequently cease to exist suddenly, or manufacturing with the old logo stops. That is naive and absolutely false. To indemnify themselves, no good working parts would be scrapped by a company just because of an older logo. No good working mold either would be scrapped just because of an update. This isn't a digital nor a piece of paper. It would be costly and big waste of money to abruptly scrap material because the logo has been updated. Again, we see the lack of knowledge as well as asking the right questions in these associated endeavors at the very least. If one asks the right questions, it leads one to branch out into actual, knowledgeable domains that help to reasonably answer said questions, rather than cherry-picking what best fits the agenda. In this article, the author is discussing logos and rebranding. The author also goes on to quote Chief Linguistics Officer Diane Prange from the brand consultancy Strategic Name Development. Here's a pertinent snippet of that article. Quote, although the new logo will become the distinct indicator of the product, brand owners may be running certain risks in abandoning or discarding previous marks associated with the brand. Even after a logo has been replaced, it still carries some value. This is especially true of consumer brands that are valued as nostalgia, such as automobiles, beers, and sports teams, for example. As long as the company or product continues to exist, protecting old logos and marks is the best way to prevent future competitors from trading off of any retained equity. End quote. Logo disparity is not exclusive to reality shifts. Intentional logo change, too, is not at all uncommon, and Ford is no exception. The notion that Ford changed its official logo does not automatically cease nor vanish the older ones. Since older ones linger, they can easily be mixed in and certainly influence our memory, especially when favored. I notice many of the Mandela effect people find the pigtail loop unappealing. Of course, they take it to a new level by asserting that reality has shifted because, as they'll say,
that pigtail loop just doesn't look right. It just doesn't feel right. It can't be right.
Another fairly popular assertion is that the Ford logo couldn't be the one with the loop because Henry Ford's signature doesn't have the loop. Another tenuous argument and assumption. Again, rather than looking at facts, the believers make simple observational conclusions. Because Ford's signature resembles the logo, the assumption is that the logo must have been a facsimile. They're at it again, making things up. The truth is, Ford's signature was the main reference, but the logo is not entirely based on it. C. Harold Wills, a Ford engineer and a former letterpress printer, created the distinctive logo script in 1906. This can all be easily referenced and verified at the Henry Ford Museum. However, there is something else much more common and more ominous than disparity based on the tribulations of manufacturing that's at play here. It has to do with counterfeiting, and in fact they were nicknamed gypsy parts. OEM parts, or original equipment manufacturer parts, are parts built by a company that originally manufactures the part for the car company, as one can read about here at Consumer Automotive Research. It's the same part in the car, but doesn't have the car maker's logo on it. Further, many car companies also utilize outsourced manufacturers to produce the parts, and then the dealer adds their own logo and packages it in their custom packaging. Parts, especially blank OEM parts, as in missing logo, and accessories such as decals and stickers, are not always clear as to their origins. Acquiring exact molds of the brand name for any purpose, even getting vinyl plotters with precision, was costly but mostly a pain in the neck to cut around nuanced detail. Many dealers used their own methods or resources to have a close enough version of the logo. Different scenarios are always involved which add to confusion. Logos can at times be duplicated fairly accurately, but still varied. Even the original company may have variations, and as we have realized, not all logo variations are officially registered. Now, pictures like this tell us an unregistered logo variation was actually used by the company themselves because it simultaneously exists with other official logos. This photo is from Etsy in the Ford Vintage section, and it shows a subtly different variation that appears to reflect what some Mandela effect people say they remember. Simultaneous evidence proves these exist because of human activity, creating different variations, counterfeit or not. It is completely unnecessary to interject a supernatural explanation. But sometimes counterfeits slip through as well, and they can very much botch the logo on the part or accessory, compounding the issue even further. So for the Mandela effect believer, this is interpreted as a shattering of their reality. For the reasonable person, this means that in addition to varying logos, in the jungle of product manufacturing and automobile market, counterfeiting and fakery of course exist and thrive. It is estimated to cost the industry $12 billion a year, costing Ford $1 billion alone, and had started as far back as 1919. One should realize if it is pervasive and has been existent that early, then we had frequent exposure to flawed, counterfeit logos as well as other influence. With that exorbitant costs, anybody with some common sense would realize we must have had imposters influencing in a boundless way. Here are good examples of counterfeits. In this example, clearly the counterfeit part contains a very wrong error, as the logo reads comically enough, "Booed" rather than Ford. But another interesting thing to note here is, even looking at the genuine part, the logo does not truly represent what the printed logo looks like. This is not cause to think a part is automatically counterfeit, or that reality shifted leaving a once-known logo behind. Better to keep in mind, fitting these engravings or dealing with small parts can be a difficult task, reproducing an exact official logo. Either way, we still perceive and experience differing logos, whether intended to be by the company for aesthetics or practicality, created by outsourced or third-party manufacturers, or if they're counterfeit. Here are more examples of counterfeit parts. For sake of accounting for all reasonable possibilities, for example, the water pump photo by John Higgins on the internet, one should consider possibly counterfeit or at best an outsourced product. I'm not only saying that because counterfeits play a general role in logo confusion, but because the thought occurred to me to ask how common are certain parts counterfeited. Wouldn't you know it, Ford specifically states that water pumps are very commonly counterfeited parts, interestingly enough. Now, we are dealing with variation from the origin, variation from third parties, or counterfeiting with inaccuracies. That's the point here, that even within the source itself, there are so many hands at recreating a badge or logo, you don't know what you're looking at, or by which entity it was made. We have enough plausible explanations to the perceptual experience shaping a particular memory. Take, for example, these fantasy pieces, not official Ford pieces, one with the more official logo, the other with a variation more akin to what some claim they remember as the true and only logo. There was even word, allegedly by a Ford representative, that these buckles were official based on a particular part number on the reverse side. But that too would only strengthen the case of humans creating these variations, or as some would see them, errors. Whatever the case may be, these things exist because humans made them, not because they magically shape-shifted and changed due to a so-called reality shift. The reasonable idea would be that if you notice a logo change, but also take note of public record reflecting that change, the simple fact grounds your conclusion. However, if that record of change was never officially registered, why assume an intellectual lurch? We already know variations of logos exist, either from the origin, third parties, or through counterfeits. Why would one need to create such fantastical, impossible, and bogus tales of reality shifts? It seems Mandela effect is about opportunity, not about explanation. Suggestibility increases significance of the experience of disparate logo variations and comes in two forms. First, the simple fact that somebody suggests the pigtail loop to have never been part of the logo induces others to believe the same thing, since it was an innocuous detail without the presence of hyper-awareness. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon comes into effect. After all, not every case is a collective mismemory. For how would we truthfully distinguish a belief created by suggestion merely appearing to be collective memory from a true collective simultaneous memory? You can't really know when it comes to the internet. Collective suggestibility, even based on just some accounts, can ignite and spread like wildfire. And when the individual preconceives the notion that something's wrong, that suggestion becomes tender. With some of these examples, because the error spans so many years, such as, "Luke, I am your father," we can safely assume those are an actual collective account. As we mentioned before, the believers do not seem to find the loop appealing. They'll use emotive phrases such as,
It doesn't look right with the loop. It can't be right, because it looks and feels wrong to me.
and this is enough for them to strongly suggest the loop never existed. That's a mix-up of tenses, creating a suggestive narrative. With a more realistic and plausible explanation, the impetus of the Mandela effect itself drives the believer to assume the logo couldn't have existed the way we see it now because the loop is unappealing. We know they don't particularly like it because they keep reiterating the fact, perhaps using that disdain as persuasion that what they are asserting and believing is true. Number 2, personal accounts of third-party made likeness of the logo, novelties, prototype items, counterfeits, or rare collector's items that may contain disparate markings or logos. This powerfully sets the effect in motion. One can of course find these alleged variations, sometimes serendipitously, matching up with an obscure general memory. Or just finding those items first with the idea that something is different is enough to fuel the confabulation, it was always that way. I find this to be true for the Volkswagen logo as well. You can, of course, find and purchase memorabilia, fantasy pieces, or decorative items with these alternate and novel variations of emblems and logos. It's not a parallel shift. It's just human activity and output. The countering view that the logo they remember couldn't be part of one-offs and novelty items, since many people have this memory collectively, I don't subscribe to as fact every time. As I posed the question moments ago, how does one decipher where the so-called collective aspect was a true memory or garnered precisely because it was suggested online? A quick glance and the effect whispers suggestively in their ear that something has changed. Fast forward to present time, where Ford and many other manufacturers are tightening security on counterfeits, collecting better intel to counter fakery and unauthorized use of logos, and you get the effect that some cosmic shift occurred because the disparate items are not found easily. The truth is, one can find them if sought after. Because our source of information, the internet, is secured so to their orders and legality, essentially cleaning up and updating related information, presenting to us what they want to push. As a business, mind you, not as metaphysical conspiracy. Also, keep in mind there is of course the error on the side of the perceiver. One's bias and perception creates suggestibility just as well. As consumers, we may also experience likeness in some logos with slight differences. One may find handmade engravings or vintage print a bit cruder or lacking nuance, rendering it different. At times, logos need to be retrofitted, so to speak, or altered to suit the surface area or geometry of an object. This old advert from 1974, for example, demonstrates the reduction and fitting of the logo on the page. It simply looks like a less cursive F without the looped secondary arm. The John Higgins photo some use to prove Mandela effect is also a great example practically of suggestible disparity, whether from counterfeits, intentional change, or tedious engraving that could lose legibility if not done a basic way that is less cursive. Continuing on suggestibility, certain manufacturing practices, cheaper templates, blotters, and especially typographic errors in newspaper printing do not present nuance of the logo loop too well in most cases. In turn, the loop filled in solid, creating the illusion of no loop at all. The O in some of the prints would close or appear more closed. For example, look at these vintage badges I found. But it wouldn't matter without the advent of hyper-awareness. Here's another from the 70s. Although the tip of the arm here is more balled up and obvious, it still doesn't come across as a loop or pigtail. Here's another old badge. Here we see a vintage lapel. This embroidered patch is another good example of limitations creating likeness of a logo with missing nuance, but can easily come across as one of the logo variations. And I believe this particular logo Ford confirmed in the Ford brand protection link as counterfeit. At cursory glance, repetitively, this comes across as the logo you think you are remembering as the official logo. The type of Ford logo one would typically see back in the day in newspapers. Would one really think much of that, let alone clearly perceive a pigtail loop? We also find in this case more oversights of the implications of simultaneous evidence. There isn't much in this case, or at least they aren't as easy to find, since it isn't based on wording but a design difference. Any arguments can stand to explain why different logos exist but are hard to find. But it doesn't matter, since simultaneous evidence debunks the metaphysical explanation. There is another popular picture somebody posted of the side back view of a Ford truck. It is a picture of the Ford logo decal, and it is the logo the Mandela effect people are remembering. It's also a good example of disparity for the multitude of reasons we have discussed earlier. This example is unique, though, as it contains the more powerful simultaneous evidence that's within the same body. Now let's uncover this simultaneous evidence that is right under our noses. I was able to find the thread the individual had originally posted this picture to see if I could find more information about it. I was immediately wondering why the rest of the truck wasn't included, so we can unravel simultaneous evidence for debunking. Lo and behold, I found the pictures elsewhere showing the other logos on the truck, and I see the individual confirms it. They say, oddly enough, all the other logos on the truck are the new logo with the weird loop. Simultaneous evidence strikes again, and its implication goes right over their heads. It's not odd at all. If your premise is bizarre, you don't grasp the implication, then it won't make sense. The fact these two things are found together debunks the effect. It shows intentional disparity yielding variation, third-party logo likeness, or counterfeits. I did also find another example of simultaneous evidence. This site, Tip Top Signs, possesses two Ford decal stickers. The Fs are not the same, and yet there they are on the same medium as simultaneous evidence. The variation is not some parallel universe secret. Now imagine these cognitive phenomena and perceptive experiences over and over through time without awareness of detail, a kind of cognitive scotoma. Looking too much into small, insignificant detail with a now hyper-awareness and exaggerated significance leads to inductive reasoning in many cases. Third-party likeness, fakery, suggestibility by consensus, and prototypical memorabilia with disparate changes resume denial of what is actually real. Rather than inferring change or disparate variation with perpetual suggestibility influencing memory, they defer to paranormal and superstitious ideas.